welcome everyone to the 18th Annual Tallgrass Film Festival. I'm Alex Megaro. I'm a filmmaker who's had multiple films in Tallgrass's past, and it's a big thrill that I get to be on the other end of the festival world for this. First thing, thanks to our sponsors and anyone else who's joining us at home. It means a lot to us that you're supporting indie filmmaking, especially in the current rather chaotic climate. And if you're having a good time and enjoying this experience, we would love it if you shared your joy on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, LiveJournal, MySpace, Zanga, Friendster, whatever else is out there. Tag us at Tallgrass Film or use the hashtag Tallgrass2020. And I'm very excited today because I'm going to be discussing a really wonderful documentary feature called 9/11 Kids. And joining me is the director of the film, Elizabeth St. Philip. She is a director and producer of numerous films, but aside from that, a senior producer at CTV National News in Canada. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Oh, hi, Alex. I'm very glad to be here.
So just to begin, when I read the synopsis of your feature, I thought, this sounds like it's a really strong short film. And I'm like, how is she going to stretch this into a feature? I've seen docs that try and bring a story into an extended length that doesn't quite make sense. But I'm like, it's not what it's about, it's how it's about it. I'm really excited to see what she does to make this work. And then 16 minutes into the film, I realized the discussion of 9/11 was kind of over. It still pervaded the whole story, but you did the short film that was in my head. And then you brought us into this world of sort of individual biographical documentaries and individual stories of the different students in a way that I didn't expect. I thought was really wonderful and unexpected. It was kind of like you were doing a version of the Up series following these kids many years later. So my initial question would be, what was the genesis of this project? But also, did you go into it with that idea of doing a larger cultural tapestry versus just kind of an investigation of 9/11 and the experience of the kids in the classroom that day?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess first of all, the concept or the idea actually did come from Steve Gamester, who's the co-producer and executive producer on the documentary. And he, obviously 9/11 for both of us, like we remember it quite well. We were actually both working at the time. And so that event, because it was such a tragic event, so shocking, scary, there was a lot of grief. It had always stayed with me. And so when he asked me to be the director and the co-producer, I really jumped at the chance. I thought it was a great concept. But to answer your question, we always wanted to do a larger story. So we wanted to meet these kids and then find out, it's like almost 20 years later, find out where they are now, but also by telling their stories, hopefully get a sense of what's happening in America, but through them, through their own voices. So that was really what we wanted to do. And, we grappled with how to do that, to weave all those different stories and themes together. But that was really our intention from the beginning.
No, it's fascinating. And it's so interesting because 9/11 as an event, obviously cataclysmic for the entire world, especially, it was the beginning of like a new kind of hindrance and anger at the other. Obviously, racism is pervasive everywhere, especially in the US and its history, but it took on a new feeling. I remember being here and there was not any kind of active antagonism towards Muslims or at all, really. They were part of society, it's fine. And then once this event happened, we had a new target. We had something to focus our ire onto, and you could feel it was palpable, it was a change, it was disgusting. And what your film does so brilliantly is you tackle that directly, and you follow how a new other keeps arising over the years. At one point, someone even outright states, first it was terrorists, then it was Muslims, then it was Mexicans, then it was Bolivians, and then it just Hondurans. And you also allude to now that the Chinese community was being focused upon with one shot because of COVID. I thought it was kind of brilliant. At what point did you realize that this was like a larger mosaic of society?
I think we believed that from the very beginning, but we didn't really know it was going to develop the way it did, because obviously it was really dependent on the young people who were going to be in the documentary. Like, some of their stories actually allowed us to move in certain directions. And what you mentioned about the other and what happened after 9/11. I think through the story of Lazaro, whose parents are from Mexico and Cuba, we were able to touch upon that theme, definitely. So I think that it really depended on the stories, that it helped us allow telling this larger story about America. There's obviously the story about the encounter of Black men and the police, and that also we were able to talk about that through two different young people, like one, Natalia, whose brother was shot by police, and another, a really charismatic, smart young man named Tyler, who, through an encounter with the police, his life kind of gets upended. And I guess you have to watch the film to find out. But I really think that the stories, drove that larger theme. Like, it came from those individual stories.
Yeah, and outside of just targeted ire in a larger sense, like from who our government is focusing on to who we can focus on to hate, so we don't realize that our own issues are pretty bad. There's this idea of the otherization of the Black and Latino community in Sarasota specifically. Someone mentioned, I believe it was the radio DJ, said there's a 10-block radius that the entire Black community inhabits in Sarasota. Outside of that, it's just disgusting wealth and affluence, and it's very obviously segregated. And this is a classroom that was, I believe, entirely or almost entirely Black and Latino students. So I think that your film is investigating the other in a larger scale and on a smaller one. I was wondering if you could talk about the Black community specifically in Sarasota.
Yeah. So the community that these young people come from, it is actually, if I could step back for one moment, because I wanted to say the kids in the class who did come from a predominantly Black community, which was poorer, the reason that they were actually even in the class is because they were very bright, and they were chosen because they were the best readers in the county. So, these are people with incredible potential. So they come from Newtown, which is this community of predominantly Black, poor neighborhood, over-policed, they would say, a lot of surveillance, and that's the community that they live in. The fact is, Sarasota is quite segregated. One of the criminal lawyers that we spoke to did describe that, and he said, there's a community of Black people on one side, and then, wealthier white people in other parts of the city. And yes, of course, that informs how these young people grow up, their experiences, even in terms of the topic of racial profiling, which does come up, where many believe that the police go into that community sort of looking for people who might be breaking the law. So there's more of an opportunity for young people to get caught in a net, which takes them into the criminal justice system or criminal injustice system, depending on how you look at it. So all of these issues, I think, by just telling their stories or having them tell their stories, you get to see a larger picture of how society works, some of the systemic problems and challenges that these young people are facing.
Yeah, it's thematically rich. It's a great portrait of what America is. And I also love that you were able to tackle disability with the one student who had been shot. And that's something that's not focused on, someone else who's otherized in society. And something it's sort of unsaid is the one student who joined the military is then, whether just sort of by default of being in part of this institution, he's in the government, in the military, which does happen to otherize people while he's also a black man. It just becomes it's very challenging, very complex. And I think you really showed some wonderful truths about America, brought out through these students. And I was curious, did you know much about them before you went into this project, or were you sort of discovering their stories as you tracked them down one by one and then found this connective tissue outside of the larger event?
No, I didn't know much about them, and a huge credit goes to our wonderful associate producer, Hannah Jobin, who is actually the individual who reached out to all 16 students in the class. So obviously not all of them wanted to participate in a documentary, but the ones that did, I did not know much about them before we started. But when I was starting to read the research material, and then the first few times when we were going to meet them, yes, we kind of realized more and more like how much they had to say and how much their lives are a reflection of what is going on in the United States. So we felt quite privileged and grateful to be able to tell this larger story. So yeah, like and the students are so different. Like you made reference to some of like one young man who's in the army, and 9/11 actually was part of the reason why LaDamian wanted to join the army, and so that's part of his story. And you have somebody like Dynasty, who she and her grandmother talk about what it's like to be black living in the US and driving while black, but still she's a successful entrepreneur, and there's that story. But weaving all those stories together, like we did our very best to try to connect them all, tell the story about these young people who we first saw briefly during 9/11, and tell the story of where they've been since then, but also what it says about society, the justice system, racism, inequality in income, all of those things. We try to weave all that into the documentary.
Something else that was great, I mean, it works as a larger cultural comment, a cultural portrait, but there's a lot of universality to what's going on. And it's very simple and relatable I love what you did where you just have them hold that photo, the old class photo, and they just kind of talk about each other, not in terms of 9/11, not in terms necessarily of just larger issues facing us. It was just, oh, that was the guy I had a crush on. Oh, he was the funny one. And it shows that even though they're tied together from a larger event and they're sort of, it's a big scenario in their world, they're just regular kids like everyone else. These kids who were all close together in this school, they all went these crazy divergent paths. That's a mix of that event in the case of the men who joined the military, and then others, it's just how their lives turned out. I love when they're talking about Dynasty, and someone says she really likes getting her money, which it's like, well, she's, there's a version of the American dream for some people where that is it. So there's, that's in a sense a success story. And I just think the connection that we can all have to stories like this is super, super important. And I think you did a wonderful job bringing that out. And I was wondering about some of the other students who may not factor into the documentary in a massive way. Was there anyone that you had a story that you kind of cut out versus anyone else who's not in the film just didn't want to be filmed for it?
There's nobody in the story, in the documentary who we filmed, from the class that we cut out. There was a student, he wasn't in the class, his name was Stevenson, but he was there on 9/11. He actually was behind the president when he was giving the address to the nation, and his mother, Gwendolyn Tose Rigel, she was the principal. And so we had interviewed him, but in the end, we focused more on the students in the documentary. There were, obviously there are people who didn't, want to participate. and we didn't have an opportunity to talk to them. But there was nobody who we filmed and then ended up not being in the documentary. Nobody from the class that we filmed that didn't end up being in the documentary. And in fact, I mean, we feel so grateful that we have the students that we do have, because some of them, it took a long time to gain their trust. Like, you know, obviously we're outsiders, we're Canadians, we're saying like, hey, we want to do this documentary, trust us, and want to tell your stories. So it took a while. Like, you know, with Tyler, it took such a long time to gain his trust that, you know, I went to, you know, we all actually went to his mother's house. We slipped notes under her door to get to him. We spoke to his dad, his stepmother, and finally, you know, we built a relationship, and we were able to get his story. And I'm so happy that we did. But yeah, there was nobody that we filmed and then said, now that, you know, we're not going to tell this person's story. I think we would have done more had we had the time and budget.
Yeah, that you brought up what I wanted to ask next, which really was about being from Canada. Was there some sort of suspicion on the part of any of the students at first, being like, "Oh, well, we probably know the outsider view of America from anyone, anywhere," especially in regard to this event? Did that come up at all when you're trying to gain their trust?
Maybe not explicitly like, oh, you're from Canada, but I think just being an outsider, wanting to tell their stories. Like, Kay Daniel actually was the main person who we really had to convince, and we really had to gain her trust, because she's still in communication with all those students. And so when we're reaching out saying, hey, we want to do this documentary, they're talking to her and each other saying, you know, should we do this? Who are these people? So she kind of vetted us to make sure that we were, you know, up for the challenge. She's an amazing woman, by the way, like really wise and kind and so strong. And she, to this day, calls these students her babies. So she really wanted to know our intentions. She wanted to know whether we would do right by these young people. So I think because we were strangers, even more than we were Canadians, like just because they didn't know us, they just really didn't, they took their time to figure out like who we were and whether they wanted to participate. But you know, it worked out. And yeah, so and Kay, like we're just both, like myself and Steve, we're so gratified when we met her, and then the opportunity to do an interview with her. She's really, really special individual, and she really instilled in those students this sense of optimism and hope. She did it when they were young, but she continues to do it throughout their lives. And we really felt actually that when we met her, she became the soul of the documentary, as well as the theme of hope came through her. And then that also we feel is the theme of the documentary ultimately, despite all the challenges and the difficulties that so many of the young people face, that ultimately they're very optimistic about themselves and the future, even the future of America. So yeah, ultimately we believe our documentary is about hope and optimism.
Well, that's an amazing way to leave it, I think. What is next for you? What's next for this film, and then what's next for you as a filmmaker?
Well, it's still in the festival circuit. There's it's going to be another film festival that I don't think we're allowed to say quite yet, because they haven't said it publicly, but it will be in another film festival in a few weeks. And yeah, we'll continue to do the film circuit, but we very much, you know, hope that it will find a home in the US, and so that it will be broadcast in the United States, because we'd love more people to see the documentary and to meet these young students, because, you know, we think that they're fantastic. I think what they have to say about themselves in America is important. So we really hope one day that it gets broadcast in the US as well.
I really hope so. I think it'll find a very large audience here. I think it's important that Americans get to see this film. So yeah, thank you so much. This has been amazing, and I hope everyone gets a chance to see this. It's a really, really wonderful documentary and very unexpected heartwarming one, and I think it's very important.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you for this opportunity. We're so happy to be screening at the Tallgrass Film Festival. And so thank you for this time. Really appreciate it.